Supernatural spent 15 seasons torturing Sam Winchester. But then they left his soul locked in a cage with two seriously pissed off archangels while his body just walked around topside, and left us confused. So we're getting into Sam's missing soul, why death couldn't fix it, and how a mid-level angel somehow could. There are some genuinely wild answers, and I think by the end of this you're gonna look at the whole arc completely differently. The sacrifice that started this whole mess. So check this out. The whole thing starts at the end of Season 5, when Sam makes the most unhinged sacrifice in the show's entire run, and drags himself, Lucifer, Michael, and his half-brother Adam into the cage. This inescapable supernatural prison buried in the absolute deepest pit of hell. World saved, apocalypse averted. Winchester heroics at maximum levels. Except then, Castiel pulls Sam's body out of the cage and just leaves the soul behind. No explanation. The soul stays locked in with two archangels who have nothing to do, and a mountain of personal beef with Sam Winchester specifically. And what follows is an eternity of torture that the show only shows us in brief, horrifying flashes, because anything more would be unwatchable. Here's the thing though, and this detail actually matters a lot. In hell, spiritual beings can manifest coherent physical forms, which is the same reason we see Lucifer appear in Nick's body during those vision sequences. Sam's soul wasn't just a glowing ball of light getting knocked around. It looked like Sam. It had Sam's shape and form, which means the torture wasn't abstract. It was visceral. It was physical. It was fire and hooks and chains and worse things the show heavily implies but mostly leaves to your imagination. And because it's an immortal soul rather than a killable body, none of the damage ends it. There's no mercy of death. It just keeps going indefinitely. The body upstairs has no notes. Meanwhile, the soulless body wakes up in a field, feels absolutely nothing about any of this, and immediately gets back to hunting. And okay, I need to pause here because soulless Sam is one of the most genuinely interesting things the show ever did, and it tends to get treated like a weird Season 6 detour rather than the fascinating character study it actually is. Because here's what nobody tells you about a person without a soul. They're not a zombie. Soulless Sam is sharp, efficient, focused, and completely terrifying because he's still recognizably Sam in every surface way. He's still smart. He's still capable. He's still got the hair. What he doesn't have is any form of guilt, fear, empathy, or emotional attachment to a single human being on Earth, including Dean. He doesn't sleep. He treats people like variables in an equation. He makes calls that fully souled Sam would never in a million years consider, and he makes them without a second of hesitation. And the most unsettling part of it is that he's standing right there in Sam's body telling Dean he's fine, and Dean almost believes him for a while. I mean, come on, that's legitimately creepy writing. Dean figures it out, Castiel confirms it, and the mission to retrieve the soul begins. But Castiel immediately throws up a red flag. He thinks retrieving the soul might actually be a terrible idea, because whatever the archangels did to it while it was caged is going to hit Sam's mind like a freight train the moment it's back in his body. His theory is that the damage won't show up as physical wounds, but as psychological devastation so catastrophic that death would genuinely be preferable to experiencing it. Dean being Dean ignores this warning entirely, but Castiel's read turns out to be almost exactly right. Even death can't clean this up. Death retrieves the soul halfway through Season 6, and even he, the literal embodiment of death himself, describes the thing as having been flayed to its raw nerve. He also makes a point of saying, souls can't be broken or divided, and when Dean asks if they can just remove the damaged section and call it a day, Death shuts that down immediately, says it's not within his power to erase Sam's hell. And yeah, right, think about what that actually means for a second. This is Death, the guy who strolls casually in and out of the inescapable cage like it's got a revolving door. The guy who can alter the movement of celestial bodies if he feels like it. Castiel, a significantly lower power level than Death, erases years of intimate memories from two people's minds later that very same season without breaking a sweat. So if this were purely a bad memory situation, a collection of horrible thoughts to be deleted, then why on earth is it so impossibly difficult to treat? The fact that Death can't just wipe it tells you the damage is operating somewhere completely different from memory. What death does instead is build a wall inside Sam's mind, a psychic partition that quarantines the cage memories and keeps them from destroying the rest of his mental architecture. It works well enough mostly, right up until the season 6 finale when Castiel does the most Castiel thing and collapses the wall on purpose as part of his whole God mode situation. Sam flatlines into a coma, and his mind fractures into 3 separate pieces. Core Sam, who doesn't remember anything about himself. Soulless Sam, who carries all the memories gathered by his body while it was running solo. And Scarred Sam, who remembers every single thing the cage did to him. Core Sam eventually reabsorbs the other 2, wakes up with the full picture, and rejoins the fight. But the damage is still in there, and it starts bleeding through almost immediately. Hallucifer is not what you think. It begins small, chains coming out of walls, impossible things flickering at the edges of his vision, and then Hallucifer shows up. And I want to be really clear about what Hallucifer actually is, because the show deliberately blurs this line, and it caused a lot of confusion, including for Sam himself. He's not real. He's not some residual fragment of the actual Lucifer. When Castiel briefly takes on the damage himself, he describes Hallucifer as a projection, a manifestation of Sam's memories that his mind has externalized and configured into a separate figure. Sam's psyche is taking the part of itself that's still defined by what Lucifer did to it and pushing it outward into a hallucination, because dealing with it as an internal thing would mean accepting it as part of his identity, and that would be game over. When Hallucifer first shows up, he has a genuinely alarming grip on Sam's perception, convincing enough to impersonate Dean and lead Sam on a whole wild goose chase before the real Dean figures out what's happening and teaches Sam to anchor himself in physical pain, specifically a cut on his hand that he can press on to remind himself what's real. It works for a while. And then Sam makes the mistake of acknowledging that Hallucifer noticed something Sam hadn't consciously registered yet during one case, and that tiny slip is the crack that breaks the whole system. Because once Sam even halfway buys into the idea that his hallucination has independent information and independent agency, the rational part of his brain has accepted the delusion as real, and there's no walking that back on your own. The scar-poking trick stops working entirely. Hallucifer goes 24 hours a day, blocks Sam from sleeping, and starts running him toward a full system shutdown from exhaustion. It gets close, terrifyingly close, before Castiel shows up at the last possible second and does something nobody saw coming. He tells Sam he can't erase the damage, but he can shift it onto himself. And honestly, that sentence is what sent me down the rabbit hole that became this whole video, because what? Death, a primordial cosmic force who can casually rewrite celestial mechanics, cannot fix this. But Castiel, a mid-tier angel who spent most of Season 6 making catastrophically bad decisions, can just take it off Sam's hands? I mean, come on. How does that work? To answer that, you've got to understand what the damage actually is at a fundamental level, and the show actually gives us the lore framework to figure it out if you pay attention to how it handles demons and ghosts. Check this out. Torturing human souls in hell is literally the process that creates demons. The souls get mutilated so thoroughly and for so long that their essence gets corrupted into something completely inhuman. But the show implies, especially in those early seasons, that the real tipping point for full demonification isn't the physical damage. It's when the person stops seeing themselves as human. When the wounds stop being things that happen to them and start being who they are. When the suffering gets absorbed into their core identity at such a deep level that you can't separate the person from the pain anymore. Ghost behavior shows the exact same principle from a different angle. There's no fixed ghost appearance in Supernatural because how a ghost looks is tied to their self-image, and self-image is tied to memory and perception. Some ghosts carry their death wounds into the afterlife and some don't, and we even see living changes in self-perception completely alter a ghost's appearance mid-show. What this tells you is that for a human soul, the psychological and the physical aren't two separate things the way they are for a material body. They're the same thing. Perception shapes condition. Condition shapes perception. They're completely intertwined. So Sam's damage wasn't purely psychological or purely physical. It was both at the same time. because in the context of a soul, those categories don't actually exist separately. He got brutalized so savagely for so long that he started internalizing the suffering as a core truth about himself, absorbing it into his identity at such a foundational level that erasing it would be like trying to erase the person. You can't cure a demon by wiping their memory for the same reason. Their suffering isn't sitting on top of who they are. It has become who they are. That's why death can't fix it. That's why you can't just cut out the bad part. And that's also, weirdly, why the soulless body situation ends up being one of the most important factors in Sam's survival. The accidental cure nobody planned for. Here's the thing. If the damage comes from Sam internalizing the cage as his core identity, then theoretically you could heal him by getting him to understand that the cage is one chapter of his story and not the whole story. In practice, that's basically telling someone to just get over their trauma and think positive, which obviously doesn't work. But Sam's psyche had an accidental advantage nobody else in that situation would have. When he got his memories back, he didn't just get the cage. He also got a full set of parallel memories of his soulless body walking around doing genuinely unhinged things during the exact same time his soul was being destroyed. That's not comforting information. It's deeply disturbing information. But it's also so shocking and so confusing that it forms its own separate identity within Sam's mind, one that wasn't touched by the cage trauma because it was happening somewhere completely else. His psyche couldn't be overwritten by a single dominant experience. So when the wall came down, it fractured instead, and that fracture was actually what allowed him to survive it. The wall mattered too, beyond just the short-term fix, because by giving Sam a buffer period between getting his soul back and getting the memories back, death accidentally gave him time to rebuild a post-cage identity before the breakdown arrived. He knew something bad was coming at some point. He didn't know when or exactly what, but that knowledge alone gave him enough of a foundation to hold on to when it finally hit. When the wall fell, there was still a core Sam capable of pulling the pieces together instead of just being consumed by the worst of them. What Castiel actually took and why it broke him. So by Season 7, Sam has done the genuinely miraculous thing of separating himself from the cage as an identity. The cage is something that happened to him, not who he is. What's left is the nagging part. The Lucifer-shaped voice that keeps insisting Lucifer is a permanent fixture in his story, that his experiences aren't real unless the devil is there defining them. And that specific thing, a persistent delusional anchor rather than a complete identity collapse, is something an angel's abilities can actually work with. Angels alter perception, plant and erase memories, sever psychic connections. We've seen all of that. Hallucinations and delusions fall well within that territory, even if total soul corruption doesn't. Castiel can't cure a demon because a demon's suffering has become their bedrock. But by the time he steps in, Sam's suffering is no longer his bedrock. It's just a very loud, very persistent voice that won't let go and that Castiel can take. The voice then recalibrates to Castiel's own damage, all the enormous failures of the past 2 years. The Crowley Alliance, the God Mode disaster, cracking Sam's wall, good intentions every single time and catastrophic outcomes every single time. Post-transfer Castiel becomes conflict avoidant and goofy, and completely unwilling to make serious decisions because on some level the voice has convinced him that every major call he makes ends in disaster, so why make any? He dishes out nose boops and warps away from arguments and constructs this whole anti-Castiel persona. And it reads like recovery, but it's actually just a very elaborate way of hiding. It's a mask. He knows it's a mask, which is exactly why he drops it the moment he hits purgatory, and survival depends on him actually showing up as himself. None of that means he's cured by the time he and Dean get pulled out of purgatory, by the way. He literally tells Dean he wanted to stay there as punishment for his mistakes, so the man is very much still carrying it. But the Beekeeper era is over. And whatever combination of Naomi's interference and the Angel Tablet situation happens in Season 8 seems to mute enough of it that he can function going forward. Whether that counts as fixing it or just learning to live with it is honestly an open question. So there's the full picture on Sam's soul, what actually happened to it, why it was so impossible to treat, how he survived it anyway, and what Castiel actually took off his hands. Which part of this arc messed you up the most on your rewatch? Drop it in the comments. More coming soon, but for now, carry on.